swear, I go fill up my cup and my cat is in my chair all the time. Okay, so if you came here from TikTok, you know I finished reading this book, Funny Story by Emily Henry. And I have some things to say about it. All right, first, let's start with the plot. So, Funny Story follows Daphne, right here. She has moved to this small town in Michigan. I think it's like a vacation town in Michigan. She's just moved to this vacation town in Michigan. I believe it's also along the Lake Michigan. I think they say that several times. It's on one of the Great Lakes. And I swear, my cat. I swear. I swear. Why? Why? Cat tax. Anyway, so she's just moved to this town with her fiance Peter, and they're planning their wedding there. And while he's away at his bachelor party, he reconnects with his childhood best friend Petra, who I believe was also supposed to be in the wedding. It's not specific, but he realizes that he's in madly in love with Petra, and leaves Daphne with nothing essentially. He's bought a house there. It's in his name, so she's out essentially, and she has to find somewhere to live. Well, Petra's boyfriend at the time, who was madly in love with Petra, Miles, he's gotta fill Petra's spot in his house. He's got to cover rent. So he offers Daphne a place to stay. While Daphne's giving herself essentially the summer. She's got a big gig coming up called the Readathon. She's a librarian. And she's got this Readathon gig coming up. And that's pretty much all she's looking forward to. And her goal is to essentially get out of this town that wasn't hers to begin with. She doesn't feel tied there. And when Miles finds us out. Really? My cat is trying to jump on my chair. Anyway, when Miles finds us out, he wants her to stay there because he doesn't think it's right that she should just leave. The thing is, she's not tied there. Her family's back home. Her friends are back home. So why would she stay? Anyway, so essentially, when they get an invite to Peter and Petra's wedding, which is essentially the same date that Daphne and Peter's wedding was, they VP back that they're going with a +1 each other, which obviously throws Peter and Petra into a tizzy because they didn't think that they would get together, and it's supposed to be a fake dating trope. Essentially, Miles and Daphne are pretending to date while Peter and Petra are supposed to be getting married, and Miles is using this time to convince Daphne to stay in this town. And then chaos ensues. I gave this 3 stars. I know there are going to be some Emily Henry fans who are big mad because I gave it 3 stars, especially when I gave Book Lovers. I rated this book 3 stars, and I rated Book Lovers 5 stars. Was there a big difference between the two? Honestly, no. However, some things were not executed as well in this one as they were in this one, and I want to discuss that, especially because some of them are from an author's perspective. Some things that I noticed as an author that as a reader you might not see, but I see, and it took me out. Why did I give this 3 stars? Here are my problems with Funny Story. So, big one is I saw typos, which usually I don't make a big deal about typos. However, this is published by Berkeley, which is attached to Penguin Random House, which is a top 5 publisher, meaning that it had a team of editors look over it. It had a copy editor, it had a line editor, it had a content editor. It also has a talent agent who read it first and then put it to the publishers. So it had like at least 4 or 5 people other than the author look at it, not to mention like beta readers, and there were still typos. And that's the thing, like with indie authors, I give them a lot more grace because usually you're paying like $1,000 for like one editor. It's a lot of money to get one editor, but when you're going with a publisher, it's paid for. It's essentially part of them prepping the book for market. So it's a bit different. And to see typos in a top 5 publisher book, that's kind of frustrating. One of the ones I noticed it throughout reading, but one of the big ones I noticed last night was Elda, who shows up in like the last couple chapters, and her name flip-flops a few times between Elda to Elsa. So ELDA versus ELSA. So why wasn't that caught? Why wasn't stuff like that caught? And it happened throughout. It might have been happening in the other books, but because of the other reasons, I wasn't noticing it. And I was noticing it in this one. The next part, characters. The characters' logic and drives felt way more organic in Book Lovers versus Funny Story. There were moments where it felt like the characters were denying their own reason, their own logic. The big one was when things started to heat up between Miles and Daphne. Now, when things start to heat up, they're not even friends. They're barely acquaintances. They've flirted a few times. They've agreed to do this thing to get their exes kind of jealous, and in that way they're kind of comrades in arms. But beyond that, they're not even friends. So the logic there, if sexual tension comes up, would be that they would enter a friends with benefit situation or have a no strings attached situation, and they decide not to. Why? They don't really answer that. And the characters themselves, they have deep relationship traumas, which would reasonably make them less likely to feel that need for commitment, at least at that time. Essentially, if you just broke off a 5-year engagement, which I believe Daphne did, it's been several years that she's been with this guy, and they've been engaged at least for 2. You break off a 5-year engagement, you are not looking to jump in to a full-blown relationship with somebody else. You're looking to have some fun. You're looking to find yourself again. And yeah, the story is about finding herself, but she wouldn't logically think, oh, Miles, another relationship. That's not the thought. And the whole reason why they kind of deny their sexual chemistry and really try and push this friendship is because they have this idea, I don't want to screw this up, which feels really manufactured at that point. And you have other characters that don't really feel like they should be there. They're only there for outward framing of the story, if that makes sense. They feel kind of superfluous to the character arc itself, the character arcs of the main 2 itself. And that really comes down to the last part, the last reason I have a big issue with it. The writing was really formulaic. Now, let me preface this. A lot of people will say formula writing is essentially lazy writing. I don't agree with that. Because you're still writing a whole novel. It's very common for romance authors to be formula writers. They find something that works and they kind of roll with it. And even the most famous romantic writer was a formula writer, Shakespeare. All of his romantic comedies were formulas. The thing is, the formula itself is not readily apparent. Like, yeah, you can see a few patterns, but it's not obvious. When it becomes obvious, that's when it's a problem. And that's where I had a problem with this writing. I had read Book Lovers, and I love Book Lovers, but then I got to here, and the patterns I saw here were way too obvious with what I read in Book Lovers. It was like almost reading the same book, but the characters' drives didn't match it. So that's the first one. It really can take a reader out if you have a formula and you're trying so hard to stick to that formula, but the characters are telling you something else is supposed to be happening. Okay? Um, Big one, and I mentioned it with the characters fighting their own logic, their own reasoning for the sake of the formula. So there were a couple steamy scenes before you get to like the big steamy scene at the end. She has a tendency to do that. She did that in Book Lovers, where there were a couple scenes where like, oh, is this going to go further? No, 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 no. Let me pull that strap back over the shoulder. Um, that kind of thing. And in Book Lovers, you kind of understand it. I mean, it was a little frustrating, but at the same time, you kind of understand it. With this, it really felt disingenuous, uh, and it really felt like she was only putting it there because either her editors or her formula has said you need to have 3 spicy scenes, 2 mild spicy, and 1 full blown, and that it takes you out. It feels wrong when you're writing, or not even when you're writing. When you're reading, it feels like, oh, I don't know about this. It's not what the characters would do. You have to, even if you have a formula, you have to do you have to write what the characters would do logically. You have to have that reasoning. I do know that there's some writing advice that sometimes your characters will do illogical things. Yes, true. But they have a logical reason behind it. They have a logical reason that's based in their character behind it. Even if it seems contradictory with something they've done before, they still have a logical reason that they're doing something. Okay? You don't feel that with this. Or at least I didn't. And it was noticeable. Another part of the formula writing problem is sometimes you have the same characters showing up in different stories, and not like, oh, I'm referencing this story with a character from this story. That's not what I'm saying. One of the characters, it's a side character, I've noticed that Emily has written in both this book and in Book Lovers, and it felt more genuine in Book Lovers than it did in this one. Was Emily Henry has a flighty sibling character who's hiding a plot-twisting secret that exposes one of the MC's traumas. In Book Lovers, it was Libby, the main character's sister, who was hiding a secret that they're moving. In Funny Story, it's Miles' sister, Julia, who is hiding something about their parents getting on her case again. It felt forced. Honestly, Julia felt like she wasn't entirely necessary to the plot. You could have solved that with like a phone call from his mom or a phone call from his dad. What Julia went through, you could have solved with just Miles. You did not need her as a character. And again, seeing that character show up from another book, it's the same character, different name, but essentially the same character. Yet, it's a problem. And that's where it exposes that formula writing, and it feels lazy. Again, I don't like to say it's lazy writing because you are still writing a whole novel, but it feels lazy from a reader's perspective. And the last bad part about formula writing, especially when you have characters who you're defying logic and defying reason for your characters, for the sake of your formula, for your characters to follow along with your formula, there's a tendency to let miscommunication as a trope fill in where the characters need to pivot back to the formula. One of the big examples I have of this from Funny Story is the third act breakup. And it's due to Daphne not knowing where Miles was one night. She's never really had to worry about that because he's always been upfront about where he is and what's going on. He's always told her what's going on with the things around him. And that's a good thing. That communication is always key. And since that wasn't missing, why was it suddenly missing in this scene? Well, you find out that Petra and Peter have broken up, and it's supposed to add to this whole oh, is he getting back together with Petra? No, I don't. It's all wishy washy, and it wasn't necessary. It really felt unnecessary because they didn't. She didn't really push the Petra and Peter thing as far as it could have gone. She let Peter make an ass of himself several times over. Okay, he was a straight up jerk, um, and he said some really degrading stuff to Daphne throughout the book, as well as said some really demeaning stuff about Miles, um, and that yeah, that should have been accounted for, but like there could have been more. I can't count how many times there were instances in the book where I was like, you know what? I want another interaction between Daphne, Peter, Petra, and Miles. You really don't get to see Petra and Miles interacting. Like, that never happens. It happens like one time at essentially a dance. Um, and I could have done with more of that. I could have done with a little bit more fleshing out of Peter's character, and definitely more of Petra's character. So you feel more justified. Well, I mean, you feel justified in hating them because like they cheated and they broke an engagement with little care of the people they hurt in the process. I mean, you already do hate them for that, but like you kind of want to hate on them more. And she really could have played into that and not worried about the extra characters and really focused on those four. She could have really focused on those four, and she didn't. Yeah, she added a will they won't they at the end that really wasn't necessary because Miles had never shown that tendency to begin with, and that's why Daphne trusted him. Now all of a sudden he's showing this. This doesn't follow logically with who he is as a character, and the fact that he knows that that's a trigger for her with her trauma. He's been aware of this for like half the book. So why is he now suddenly like being squirrely? Why is it all of a sudden right after they have their major spicy scene? Why is it then? It again, it feels manufactured, not organic. And when you're writing, you want your characters to feel organic. You want their decisions, the plot, you want all of it to feel organic. And I don't think she pulled that off with this one. That's why I gave it 3 stars. Not because I don't like romance books. I love romance books. And this was readable. It was good. I would say it's of similar quality. If this is your first Emily Henry book, you'll enjoy it. Um, and I have seen other people who reviewed Emily Henry books where they love her first book, and then the second book they read, they don't tend to like it as much. And it could be for this reason that you're suddenly seeing the formula and it makes it feel disingenuous. It makes it feel inorganic. And you don't want that in your books. All right, so now that that's done with, I'm moving on to bigger, better things. This is my next book read, and just in time for Valentine's Day. Yay for me. I don't know if I'll have it done by the end of February. I likely won't, unless it's like really really good. To be fair, I haven't reviewed this whole series because I have some mixed feelings about Akatar. The first book I cranked through real quick, but the second two took me about. The second book took me a year and a half to read, and the last book took me like 7 months. Or no, 8 or 9 months. Like, it took me a little while. So, I'm hoping this one is better. And to be fair, that was because I was getting really bored with Nesta. Not Nesta. I was getting really bored with Farah's character. And I have a lot of hope for Nesta. I feel like Nesta's way more interesting character than Farah, so I'm really looking forward to her book. And I know I usually do an author update at the end of the month, and today is January 31st. Well, because I finished Funny Story last night, and I wanted to post this review and make sure it was out there, I will do my author update sometime over the weekend. I'll probably post it on Monday. But this is the next read, and author update will be coming soon, and then I'll have a more steady schedule of videos. I'm hoping only once a week, but because this week was a little bit crazy, you get 2. Yay! Okay. Anyway, bigger, better things. See you next time.